A few videos back, I covered the ancestors of Prince Philip, as well as his parents and his 4 sisters. To round off this series, I thought why not make a video on his cousins as well. And so here we are. In today's video, we will meet Prince Philip's paternal cousins from his 2 eldest uncles. Next week's video will cover the rest of his paternal as well as all of his maternal cousins. Please note that I will only mention a few highlights on each of his cousins' lives, as we have many to cover. If you would like a separate, more in-depth video on one of his cousins, you can let me know in the comments down below. We are starting off with the children of Prince Philip's eldest paternal uncle, King Constantine I of Greece. He and his wife, Sophia of Prussia, had 6 children. Their eldest child was George, who was born in 1890. When George's father, Constantine, became king, George automatically became the crown prince. But when his father was deposed in 1917, George followed his father into exile, and his younger brother Alexander was made king instead. However, Alexander's reign was short-lived as well, as he died only 3 years later after a monkey bite. George's father was reinstalled as king. However, he was once again forced to abdicate in 1922, and George was made king. After a failed royalist coup in 1923, George was asked to leave the country. He did so but refused to abdicate. He and his wife went into exile in Romania, her home country. George remained king until the Second Hellenic Republic was declared in 1924. Fast forward to 1935, when 98% of the people voted in favor of restoring the monarchy. George returned that same year and was once again made king. During the Second World War, George was once again forced into exile, which he found in the United Kingdom. He returned in September of 1946, but did not get the chance to reign long, as he died on April 1st, 1947. We are now moving on to George's younger brother, Alexander. Alexander was born in 1890. He received a military education in the Hellenic Military Academy and served as an officer during the Balkan Wars. When his father was forced to abdicate in 1917, Alexander was installed as king by the government, but served more as a puppet head of state. After the war, Alexander decided to marry Aspasia Manos, his childhood friend. The marriage caused a huge scandal, as Aspasia was not of equal rank. In October 1920, Alexander was bit by a monkey while trying to remove another monkey who was attacking his dog. The wounds were cleaned immediately, but Alexander fell ill that same evening and his wounds got infected. He died on October 25, 1920. A few months after his death, his wife gave birth to their daughter Alexandra, who became Queen of Yugoslavia. Next, we have Princess Helen of Greece and Denmark. She was born in 1896 and was the eldest daughter of her parents. Much of her childhood was spent in exile, with a few returns back to Greece. In 1920, Helen was devastated by the loss of her favorite brother Alexander, a message she received while in exile in Switzerland. In 1921, Helen married Crown Prince Carol of Romania, and only 7 months after their wedding, she gave birth to their only child, Michael. Despite Helen at first being in love with Carol, their relationship soon became strained. Due to Carol's extramarital affair, he was removed from the line of succession and had to leave the country. Helen was left alone in Romania and was blamed for the failure of her marriage by her mother-in-law, Queen Marie. When Ferdinand I, Carol's father, died in 1927, Helen's infant son Michael became king. Eventually, Carol was allowed to return to Romania and took over the throne from his young son. After this, their marriage ended with a divorce, and Carol requested Helen to leave the country. With the compensation she received from Carol, Helen bought a villa in Tuscany. After a series of scandals in the 1930s, Carol had to abdicate and the throne passed to his and Helen's son, Michael. During this time, Helen was known as the Queen Mother of Romania. After the Second World War, Michael I was also deposed and the family lived in exile. After a time in Switzerland, Helen returned to her villa in Tuscany. She remained there until she got too old to live alone. She then moved to Switzerland, where she lived near her exiled son until her death in 1982. Helen's younger brother was Prince Paul, who later became King of Greece. He was born in 1901 and received a military education like his elder brother. Due to the political unrest in Greece at the beginning of the 20th century, Paul spent much of his early years in exile. During his time in exile in England, he worked in an aircraft factory. In 1938, he married his first cousin once removed, Princess Frederica of Hanover. Together they had 3 children. Their eldest daughter, Sophia, married Juan Carlos of Spain and thus became Queen of Spain. Their only son, Constantine, was the last king of the Hellenists and passed away a few months ago. Their youngest child is Princess Irene. During the Second World War, Paul had to flee to London and Cairo. He returned after the war and succeeded his childless brother in 1947. During his reign, he and his wife attracted criticism for their travels, their interference in politics, and the cost of the royal family. He died in 1964 of stomach cancer and was succeeded by his son. Paul's younger sister was Princess Irene. She was born in 1904 in Athens. At the age of 35, she married Prince Aimone, the 4th Duke of Aosta. 4 years later, their only son, Amedeo, followed. During the Second World War, her husband was made King of Croatia, a puppet state established by Germany and Italy. The couple, however, never went to their country and abdicated after only 2 years. In 1944, Irene, her son, and other family members were put under house arrest in a hotel in Austria by the Germans. They were liberated a year later and went into exile. Irene was later allowed to return back to Italy, where she lived in Florence until her death in 1974. The youngest child of Constantine I and Sophia of Prussia was Princess Catherine. She was born in 1913, shortly after the assassination of her grandfather, George I. After her father was forced to abdicate, she and her family went to Switzerland. They returned to Greece in 1920, but after 2 years they were forced into exile again. She was educated in England and was only able to return to Greece after her brother was reinstated as king. When the Second World War broke out, Catherine joined the Greek Red Cross but had to flee to South Africa in the midst of the war. She worked at a local hospital in Cape Town thereafter. In 1946, she returned to England on the RMS Ascania, where she met her future husband Richard Campbell Brandram, a British officer. They married in 1947 and had 1 son. Together, they lived in England, where she died in 2007. At the time of her death, she was the last surviving great-granddaughter of Queen Victoria. We are now moving on to the children of Prince George of Greece and Denmark and his wife Marie Bonaparte. They had 2 children. The elder was Prince Peter. He was born in December 1908 in Paris. He spent most of his childhood and teenage years in France. Later, he went to Denmark where he joined the army. Due to the ongoing political instability in Greece, Peter never visited the country until 1935. During the 1930s, Peter was an important member of the Greek royal family as he was third in line to the throne. Due to this, a dynastic marriage between him and Princess Frederica of Hanover was once discussed. During the 1930s, Peter began traveling through Asia where he would study different tribes and religions. During the same time, he met twice divorced Irina Alexandrovna Ovchinnikova. His father strongly disapproved of their relationship, but Peter nevertheless decided to marry her in 1939, thus losing his place in the line of succession. After the outbreak of the Second World War, Peter ended up back in Greece while his wife was not allowed to enter and therefore evacuated to Istanbul. The Greek royal family, however, was forced to flee when Germany invaded Greece in 1941. Peter was granted refuge in Egypt. He managed to meet his wife in Palestine, therefore. After the war, the couple settled in Denmark. By the end of the 1940s and at the beginning of the 1950s, Peter and his wife began traveling through Tibet, where he studied its people and culture. The trip lasted 7 years. Upon returning to Europe, the couple settled in the UK. There, Peter died in 1980. Peter's younger sister was Princess Eugenie. Just like her elder brother, Princess Eugenie was also born in Paris. At 28, she married Prince Dominic Rainer Radziwill. Together, they had one daughter and one son before they divorced in 1946. In 1947, at the age of 37, Eugenie was one of the leading guests at the wedding of her cousin Philip to the then Princess Elizabeth. 2 years later, Eugenie remarried and had one more son with her second husband. In her last years, she authored the book The Tsarevich, a Child Martyr. The book was published in 1990, a year after Eugenie's death. Tune in next week to meet the rest of Prince Philip's paternal cousins as well as his maternal cousins.